Hello, this is Dr. Stansel. In this lecture, I teach you a method for writing your own moral argument. The method I'm teaching you has 7 steps. It's not the only way to develop a good, strong moral argument, but it's the way that I teach my students. I find that it works well with beginning students. Let me ask you to pause the lecture here and read through these 7 steps. And then when you restart the lecture, on the following slides, I'll be describing each of these steps in some detail. You'll be writing your moral argument in response to a moral question, such as, should the drinking age be lowered to 18? So the first step is to take time to reflect on that question. Slow down, sit, and think about the question. I recommend that you review relevant course content. You go online and you browse informational sources like Wikipedia and also op-ed pieces, for example. Now, the last bullet on this slide shows a sample question. Should the drinking age be lowered to 18? And I'll be referring to this example throughout the rest of the lecture. After reflecting on the question and doing some research, it's time to determine your answer. Determine your answer to the moral question. We'll call this your moral view on the topic, and that moral view will serve as the conclusion of your argument. When possible, state your moral view using one of the formats that I've taught. Blank is morally required, blank is morally required when, and so on. And you see these on the slide. To follow through with our example about the drinking age, let's say that I reflect and I do some research and I determine that my view is it is morally required to lower the drinking age to 18. This is going to serve as the conclusion of my argument. So now I do have one piece of my argument. I've got the conclusion. Next, I want to work on getting premises that support my conclusion, and I want you to start with the simple step of just considering your one main reason for this view. So, for example, if I think that the drinking age should be lowered to 18, and I think about my reason, well, why? Why do I think the drinking age should be lowered to 18? Perhaps my reason is many adult responsibilities began at age 18. Well, great, that's a premise. Write it down. Now I have one premise for my argument and I have the conclusion. In the next step, I build my set of premises by starting with the one premise I identified in step 3. And I ask myself, why is that premise true? And I write another 1 or 2 premises that explain why my first premise, which I identified in step 3, is true. For example, to support the premise that many adult responsibilities begin at age 18, you might say people can join the military at age 18. And at age 18, people can be tried for crimes as an adult. Now I have 3 premises. And I want to take a step back and look at my 3 premises and look again at my conclusion and consider whether I have enough to get from the conclusion, to get from the premises to the conclusion. And I might add 1 or 2 premises to close that gap and show the clear connection between my first 3 premises and my conclusion. For example, I might add something like, if someone is adult enough to join the military, which is a serious responsibility, they are adult enough to drink alcohol. Finally, I might want to add, Our standards for who counts as an adult should be fair and consistent. Now I need to look at the premises that I've written so far and check them and make sure that at least one premise is a moral view, moral claim, or moral principle. A moral argument has to have a premise like that. It happens that I already have one here, and it is the very last of the premises that I wrote. Our standards for who counts as an adult should be fair and consistent. We see the word should there, and that's an indicator that I'm probably in moral territory. And then I look at this premise further. It should be what? Should be fair and consistent. These are moral concepts. So here is my premise, which makes a moral claim. It's essential to have that to link your other premises to your conclusion, which is a moral claim. The next step is to write out your argument in argument reconstruction format, putting one premise per line, labeling the premises P1, P2, and so on, writing your conclusion last, and labeling it with a C. And I'd like you to pause the lecture now and read what this argument looks like written out in argument reconstruction format. Next, work from what you just wrote to write your argument out in paragraph format. When you do that, it is a good idea to add a little more discussion to make your paragraph more readable, make it flow, and make sure that the ideas are understandable by a reader. Sometimes when we put an argument in argument reconstruction format, it's too brief, it's too skeletal, it happens too fast. So it can be a really good idea to write the argument out in paragraph format to flesh it out a little further, just to make sure you get your ideas across well. Let me ask you to pause the lecture here and read through how I've done that in this paragraph. The final step is really important, and it is to make sure that your premises include a moral reason. You're writing a moral argument, and your conclusion makes a moral claim. A moral conclusion must be supported with a moral reason. Facts alone can't support a moral claim. Moral reasons are moral claims. And one way to tell that you have a moral claim is that it includes moral vocabulary, words like ought, should, wrong, right, duty, justice, and so on. This is the sample argument that I've been writing through the lecture. This is from 2 slides ago. But if we look through this argument again, it talks about adult responsibilities starting at age 18 and all these things that happen at age 18. When we get to premise 5, the argument does include a moral reason. Our standards for who counts as an adult should be fair and consistent. Should be is moral vocabulary, and also fair is moral vocabulary. So if I was just double checking my argument and I wanted to make sure that I had a moral reason, those vocabulary that I found, namely should be and fair, that would tip me off that I probably had a moral reason here. Read the premise again, and then importantly, think about how this premise helps support the conclusion. The conclusion says it's morally required to lower the drinking age to 18. Well, why is this morally required? And P5 gives an important reason, and the reason is that morally, our standards should be fair and consistent. I want to show you another example. And what I've done here is I've got the same argument, but when it appears first on the slide, it lacks a moral reason. And then when it appears for a second time, I've added in a moral reason. You might need to do this with your argument. You might look through it and not find any moral vocabulary in your argument, or not find enough, or not find it in the right places to support your conclusion. And then you might need to add something. So let's look at this argument. At first, it appears without a moral reason. And the argument goes, premise 1, docking a dog's tail causes pain. Premise 2, docking a dog's tail serves no real purpose. Premise 3, it's traditional to dock the tail of certain breeds, but these traditions are pointless. Conclusion, docking a dog's tail is morally wrong. To dock a tail is to cut it off, and creates a really short little nubby tail. And so some people do that with certain breeds. So when we look at these three premises here in the first version of the argument, we're not seeing words like should, ought, right, wrong, duty, justice, virtue. We're not seeing moral vocabulary. Let's look at the second version. So again, premise 1, docking a dog's tail causes pain. Docking a dog's tail serves no real purpose. The premises are about pain, about unnecessary pain. That's what's going on here in these premises. Premise 3, it's traditional to dock the tails of certain breeds, but these traditions are pointless. So again, premise 3 is again saying this practice is unnecessary, right? So here's what premise 4 does. It connects the idea of unnecessary pain to a moral concept. It says it's morally wrong to cause unnecessary suffering. This leads us to the conclusion that docking a dog's tail is morally wrong. Okay, I'm going to talk about why we needed that premise. The first three premises describe that docking a dog's tail is unnecessary and painful. But just because something's unnecessary doesn't necessarily mean it's morally wrong. And just because something's painful doesn't necessarily mean it's morally wrong. Just because something is unnecessary and painful doesn't necessarily mean it's morally wrong. Think about someone getting their ears pierced. In a way, that's unnecessary and it's painful, but we say it's okay, right? So, I know that most people would read the first three premises of this argument, and they're reading about, how dogs are being harmed and it's not necessary, and you would start to think, oh, this is wrong. But we want to clarify and bring into the argument, into clear written form, the reason why it's wrong, and the reason why docking a dog's tail would be wrong. This P4 says it's morally wrong to cause unnecessary suffering. We need to say that in order to link premises 1, 2, and 3 to the conclusion. And yeah, I think that as you begin to write moral arguments, what I really often see students doing in the early moral arguments that they write for me is their premises will focus on pain, suffering, and harm. And the conclusion will be a moral claim, right? So the premise that I have here, linking pain and suffering with moral wrongness, is a really important element. And it's the kind of thing that a lot of you will find you need to add to your argument to make it complete. Because again, just because something is painful doesn't necessarily mean it's morally wrong. You need to make that connection between pain and morality in your argument. If indeed, your reason for saying something is wrong is that it causes pain. Okay. So check your argument, make sure you have the kind of support you need for your conclusion. Your conclusion will be making a moral claim. You're going to be claiming that something is not morally allowable, that it's morally allowable, that it's morally required. You need to give a reason why. Why is it morally required, or why is it morally wrong? What's the moral reason? There are a lot of different types of moral reasons you can use in an argument. We see an example here, we saw one on the previous slide, but there are really many, many different types of moral reasons you can use. Moral theories include moral principles, and moral principles are really great for including in a moral argument. They can provide a really strong reason. And so as we go through the course, you'll learn moral principles and you can start to use them when you learn them. But at first, just make sure you have a moral reason like this P4 or like the P5 from the previous slide. In your argument, it needs to fit with your other premises and it needs to fit with your conclusion. It needs to help connect the other premises to your conclusion like a bridge.